What's up, everybody? Welcome to Talking Ball live with Pat Leonard here from Indianapolis, the NFL Combine. We are here on Monday, February 23rd. And of course, a lot has happened with the Giants organization as well as in the NFL. I went to the Super Bowl, got to go into the Seattle Seahawks locker room after their win over the New England Patriots and have been following and covering the evolution of the Giants' new operation under John Harbaugh since his hiring in January, all the way through to now, where we arrive here. And this is really the beginning of the roster building portion of John Harbaugh's new Giant operation and process. And of course, we'll talk about, there's a lot more going on in the Giants organization right now that obviously is the story, right? The biggest story right now is Steve Tisch, the co-owner, and his presence in the Epstein files, and the fact that since that came to light and The Athletic reported on that on January 30th, despite a poor statement from Tisch and some poor statements from Roger Goodell, the commissioner, nothing has been done about that situation. Obviously unacceptable, and a dark cloud hanging over the Giants' entire organization and operation right now, because you can claim to have a standard that's higher than others, or that you feel is as high as it can be, and that puts you in a certain echelon as an organization and as people. But if you enable that type of alleged behavior, that type of if that's what represents you, is somebody who represents themselves that way and who is party to those emails and those realities, then you do not have a higher standard than anybody else. And so the Giants need to look in the mirror. The NFL needs to look in the mirror and address that immediately. So don't want to gloss over that at all as we talk football here. But what I'm here to do in Indianapolis, in addition to asking those questions and covering that story continually, is to investigate and poke around on the way that the Giants are operating as an organization. And as you sit there snowed in, hopefully not, but I know plenty of you are out there in the Northeast, snowed in right now at home, probably working from home, a lot of you, if you don't already. I want to give you a download on what I will be boots on the ground trying to find out and looking into here this week. And G-Men actually checks in with our first question and comment to lead us in the direction that I'm headed. And that is Pat. He says, who and which parts of the Giants front office report directly to Dawn Aponte? So the dynamic right now, as we get here on the ground in Indianapolis, Joe Schoen, John Harbaugh, scouting department, they've arrived here in Indianapolis. They, like I, fortunate enough to get out early enough on Sunday to get out here and get their work done. But there is a dramatically different dynamic, right now happening with the Giants organization now that Dawn Aponte has been hired as the senior VP of football operations and strategy. And that, as John Harbaugh said to Ian O'Connor, but as I reported that I've heard independently as well, Aponte is reporting directly to Harbaugh. And yes, her title and her job description is identical essentially to what Kevin Abrams had held before Kevin left. But that said, the structure under Harbaugh and the way that this team now looks heading into this combine and this week full of meetings is different. You know, the way I understood it, what I've heard, what sources have told me, and what I have reported is that not just does Dawn report directly to John, but that essentially the new order of things with the Giants is that Joe Schoen is in charge of the scouting department still, but the rest of the building reports to Dawn, who reports to John. And so the way that this is headed is two potential ways. One, Joe Schoen stays on. He has 1 year left on his contract, gets a contract extension, and effectively works as the senior scout, the general manager who the organization says, hey, you just focus on picking players. We don't need you doing anything else. We have people for everything else. We need you doing that. And there are organizations that run that way. Like I broached in the New York Daily News recently. Now, not the Giants obviously don't deserve to be compared to the Rams based on how they have fared in all of these situations. But the Rams are an example of a team that has a general manager who they have Kevin Demoff, and they have a team that handles, let's say, the business side of things, as well as cap structure, as well as liaising to different departments from the scouting department, coaching department, et cetera. And then you have Sean McVay, who coaches the team, and you have Les Snead, who obviously is revered as one of the better general managers in all of football, but who doesn't have to worry about anything other than just identify the best players. You and the coach then get together, decide who's going to be best for our team and pick them, right? So there are organizations where the general manager is kind of, their description is to, in so many words, hey, stay in your lane. This is what you're good at. You do it. And so that's a potential reality here. Now, as I've said, Shane's work on the draft and on building a team hasn't warranted that reality to occur. So there's a potential second option here, which is that the Giants are right now, as teams do, because John Harbaugh is new and he inherits this entire scouting department, this general manager. It's like, okay, well, are we going to rip this up and try to cram a new operation on that side of the building in before this critical free agency period, draft period that this front office was already planning for? Or are we going to use what we have at our disposal now, but it's going to kind of evolve slowly in the dynamic we have behind and now in front of the scenes here in Indianapolis, starting with meetings with agents about prospective prospects, free agents, et cetera. And then how is that then we can get through the draft and then make a decision about, okay, we're moving away from this person or this general manager or this process, and we're going to start creating our own over here, right? So there's different ways of looking at how the Giants will evolve. The biggest fascination, so to answer your question, G-Man, who reports to Aponte? My understanding, what I've been told, is that the scouting department is what Joe Schoen runs, and then the rest of the building reports to Dawn. That's my understanding there. I think, honestly, to be totally honest with you, what I've heard is, there are people in the Giants organization wondering, how is this all shaking out, right? Joe Schoen will. So we sit here Monday, February 23rd. On Tuesday morning, Joe Schoen will meet the media, and he is the Giants general manager. That is his title. But it'll be a very interesting and kind of complicated press conference and dynamic, because he will be standing up there with the same job title, but not really the same job description, and a lot of understandings and reports and murmurs and curiosities about, the guys the movie Office Space, where the two guys are interviewing everybody for their own jobs. And he says, what exactly would you say you do here? Right. And of course, as I said, Joe Schoen's still on the scouting side of things, but it's a delicate time for him, because obviously his head coach choice and his guy he was arm in arms with got rolled under the bus while Schoen survived. And certainly Daboll deserved that. He deserved losing his job. But now Schoen is here in a new structure that is certainly and clearly moving away from him having the same kind of power and say-so and direction over the rest of the building. But there are people in the organization, in ownership, who have protected, enabled, and still believe in him. And so, some people have put it like, hey, it essentially sounds like Joe Schoen's interviewing for his own job right now. That could certainly be the case. That Harbaugh is, as Schoen runs this, is evaluating him and looking to the future and deciding how workable this is as the plan and as the alignment for the Giants organization. One thing I will say, Dawn Aponte in the past, because she's been on the team side in the past. She just most recently worked for the NFL. But Dawn Aponte has been on the record in the past talking about how she, teams will have female general managers down the road, that she's, proud to be a trailblazer, or once, at going back years, was eager to continue being a trailblazer in that regard. And she's somebody who's very respected in the NFL, who teams have talked to in the past. And the fact that she decided to take this job, the Giants offered her this job, that she decided to take this job, like, it would not shock me if this was an onboarding to Dawn eventually being the Giants general manager. That is not a report. That's not a report from me. That is just me reading the tea leaves, understanding the dynamic, and creating possibilities of how this could go. And here's the final element, I would say, and thanks for kicking us off, G-Man, with that question. It's a great question. The final element of this is, I think that what I've been told, talking to people I trust in the NFL, okay, what I have been told is that one process, or one part of the scouting and evaluation process, that will be complicated for Schoen to navigate here will be when they really get down to sitting in the room and talking about what players they want, what players they don't, debating a certain player over another player, talking about the draft board and things like that. Because now listen, Harbaugh is not a general manager. He's not Ozzie Newsome, right? He's not Eric DaCosta. He was leaning on them for that, but collaborating with them in Baltimore. So he's not a general manager, but he will have defined ideas and beliefs on what he wants, what he's looking for. And he, like me, Harbaugh is, my understanding from talking to people that know him, he's somebody who likes to be challenged, who wants to challenge others, believes that conflict, right, debate, things like that is good. It's a good thing. It can sometimes be necessary to produce results. And just talking to a lot of people who know Harbaugh, my understanding is that when those conversations happen, the discussions of, building a roster and players, that could be a dicey situation for Schoen, because Harbaugh will recognize at that moment that he's not, he's used to working with Hall of Famer Ozzie Newsome and Eric DaCosta, and working with Schoen, who is much greener and has a much different track record of how he picks and identifies players, and who might not handle those situations well, or the way that those other people handle those situations with Harbaugh, that could create like an obvious moment of, yeah, this isn't going to be the right fit together. That's just from, I'm just telling you what I've been told by people. Harbaugh, the one thing about hiring an experienced coach, obviously the Giants hired him because he has a plan, a vision. He's going to have an identity that he wants the team to have, and that's going to help them fill in the pieces. And the one thing about hiring an experienced coach like Harbaugh is he's been around for long enough. People know who he is. He's not that he's a predictable person, but that he has values. He has a consistent way of going about things. He believes in setting a course. Let's create a goal together and fulfill that mission, those types of things. And so this situation, this operation, make no mistake about it, is being led by John Harbaugh. And so it will be a fascinating, and we'll talk more about this, but it'll be a fascinating dynamic, understanding how Aponte, Schoen, Harbaugh is functioning here in Indianapolis, and what that new reality means for the Giants. Thanks all for being here. This is Talking Ball Live with Pat Leonard here from Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, Monday, February 23rd. The calendar is moving quickly, not that quickly. It would be nice if it was March 23rd and we didn't have a full-on blizzard coming into the East Coast and hitting us that quickly. I was fortunate enough to get out on Sunday morning. via United through Newark to Indianapolis. So I am here, boots on the ground, reporting for you all and bringing you a preview essentially here of what is to come and what's on my mind and what's on my phone and what's going on with the Giants and in the NFL as we proceed here on a key week for the Giants, laying the groundwork for team building. Reminder, if you have a super chat or a super sticker and you purchase that, it's a great way to support the channel, and you will have your comment or question answered first. So if you purchase a super chat or super sticker, I will jump right to your question or comment first. Candyman checks in with our first super chat of the day. What's up, Candyman? Thank you so much. Great to hear from you. Great to talk to you. I know it's been a while since I've been on here, and I've been tinkering with things behind the scenes. Obviously, though, a key time for Giants fan base, the Giants organization right now, to talk about everything that's happening. And once we get into this moment with the offseason, with player evaluations, free agency, the draft, never a shortage of things to talk about. So we will continue to dive into all of those details and get back rolling with regular Talking Ball lives and guest episodes to bring you guys the latest here on Talking Ball. Reminder, if you haven't subscribed already, it's PL on NFL here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Only subscribers can ask questions in this chat. So if you're watching and it's not letting you ask a question, go back to my main homepage with another tab, go to subscribe. I believe after 5 minutes, it'll allow you to ask a question. Candyman says, welcome back, Pat. Shouldn't the Giants be making contract decisions soon with free agency upon us? Also, any rumors on the Wandale status or Illuminor? So, yes. So the way that this works, Candyman, is organizations, by the time they get to Indianapolis, organizations have already talked amongst themselves internally in meetings about player evaluations for guys on their team, for the market that they're going to seek for certain players in certain categories in free agency, in deciding, okay, here's what our draft is probably going to look like, and here's how much money we need to set aside for that with the salary cap, and creating a plan for managing the salary cap. That has all happened prior to this week. This week, though, gives you the opportunity as an organization to have direct conversations throughout Indianapolis and to gauge markets and to get a better handle on what is realistic. And that could happen on the player side, right? Like a player and an agent could find out through the grapevine that they are not valued the way that they expected, or vice versa. It could be teams going out and thinking they know we're only going to have to pay this amount of money for an offensive lineman. And then when you start having conversations, you realize, oh, we're going to really need to spend if we want to get to the top one or two of that tier of, let's say, guards, where we really need to assemble an offensive line. And if we don't spend that money, there's a huge drop off. So now we have to budget a little bit differently. This is a good week for them to come in with the best laid plans, but to understand that the foundation beneath their feet is going to start shifting a little bit, and to be able to pivot. Like, obviously, sometimes that doesn't go well. Like last year, the Giants' quarterback plan was essentially Joe Schoen throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks. And remember, they came into the combine, we want Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford's the priority, right? That didn't happen. Then it was Aaron Rodgers. That didn't happen. Then it was Joe Flacco and a bunch of other people coming in. It was Jameis Winston being signed. Then it was Russell Wilson being signed. They draft Jackson Dart, and they scotch tape a plan together, which is led, obviously, by the decision to trade up and get Dart. And he is now kind of the North Star, if you will, of the Giants' idea of what they want to be and what they're hoping to build on from 2025 and beyond. But that is how this goes, Candyman. The contract decisions are made as far as what they intend to spend, who they want to prioritize, and the swinging doors of, okay, Like, what was one example when Dave Gettleman tried desperately to sign Andrew Norwell, the guard, and then they were not able to land Norwell, and they ended up spending big money on an offensive lineman, but instead of it being a guard, they went with the tackle Nate Solder, right? So not to give you guys PTSD, but just an example of, hey, we have the money budgeted. We know we have a priority. What's the swinging doors effect if we don't land this player, right? Now, you said any rumors on Wandale Illuminor. I would say this. I don't have anything definitive on yes or no at this moment, differently from probably the chatter that you guys have heard. But here's what I would say. Illuminor was a player who helped improve the Giants' bottom line on the offensive line last year, especially, right? And the Giants, for the first time in years, are going into an offseason knowing that they made some progress in protecting the quarterback and especially, mainly, in run blocking, right? Like, the Giants definitely come out of last season encouraged by their ability to move the line of scrimmage in the run game. Now, that said, I think when you look at Illuminor, he's a 31-year-old who had essentially been a little bit of a journeyman. And I don't think it's insignificant that he was, now this is a different part of his career, but he was a player who Harbaugh had in the Baltimore organization going back to 2017, 2018, who the Ravens, moved on from. And he bounced around to then New England, Raiders, Giants. Now, obviously, he has become a better player than what he had shown in Baltimore early, and was serviceable or slightly more than serviceable last year for the Giants. But I believe that that's the kind of player where if that player wants to return, you have conversations about doing so at a reasonable number. But this is not a player who over the course of his career has shown that he is a no doubt high level shutdown tackle that you need to prioritize over all else. That is my opinion. Now, there's already been chatter that Illuminor's market is not going to be what he had hoped it to be. I view that, though, as, again, he's a slightly above average player who had a strong season on an improved line last year, but who in general is still not up into that echelon where you're going to break the bank. Now, obviously, the Giants' draft plans get impacted by what they do in free agency. And if you look at the Giants right now, not to get into the weeds too quickly, but to me, John Harbaugh is going to prioritize, leadership, physicality, the lines of scrimmage, and identity, right? And I think that even though the Giants took some strides on the offensive line last year, I think that's all the more reason to understand and recognize they need to double down on solidifying and improving this offensive line with a team that ideally, based on how they've started building and how they could better create that identity to be difficult to play against, ideally with this quarterback and with this new mindset and with this new coach, you're going to be extremely physical on both lines of scrimmage. You're going to be able to run the ball well. Neighbors obviously eventually comes back healthy, but maybe you're going to have to draft a wide receiver to help fill in the gaps there. I think that if you're re-signing Illuminor, it can't be for a ton. And obviously the challenge there is if you don't, now you already have to draft offensive linemen if you're the Giants. But if you don't re-sign your starting right tackle, Now that's another player and another body that you need to add to a line that, Greg Van Roten's a free agent at right guard. He's older. And remember, Carmen Brasillo, the coach who Illuminor and Van Roten have been so comfortable together playing under, he has now left. He's gone. He's with Tennessee. So from the player standpoint, let's go to the player standpoint. Forget the Giants' perspective for a second. To be honest, if I'm a Luminor and I know that I play my best ball for this guy, this is an interesting dynamic, right? A Luminor ideally would want, let's say, the Giants to have him valued enormously. And then let's say the Titans are saying, come here for a little less, but we have the perfect scenario for you, But if his market is such that he does not have that major financial offer to leverage against, let's say, that more comfortable situation, then what does he decide? Does he decide, well, if all things are the same, if all things are the same, I should go with the coach who I know I've had the best success with in that system, with that blocking scheme, with the way he has coached me. And, Illuminor, outspoken guy, interesting personality, but definitely not, I would say he put himself and his body and his play on the line for the Giants the last 2 years. And like I said, gave them some stability in a place where they had not had some. But I do think that you could not end up paying him and still end up with a team that continues to get, let's say, meaner and, even more physical and creating that more dominant feel, if that makes any sense. And then on your question on Wandale, so this goes back to Dart. Again, I'm interested in the Wandale situation because really good guy, good combination of everything you're looking for in somebody on a team. So what I mean by that is good intangibles, a guy who has continued to get better, very confident in himself. He produced last season, and when used consistently more down the field and in a better offense, frankly, with Mike Kafka back home plays last year, he delivered and certainly deserves to reap the benefits of that somewhere. Is that in New York? I'm actually interested to see how this goes because obviously Joe Schoen drafted him in the second round. Homegrown player, like I said, good guy, good locker room guy, production last season, and a really good relationship and rapport with Jackson Dart and with the Giants as a team. And so you say, okay, well, do we lean into all of those factors? But with Harbaugh, no emotional ties to Wandale, right? Just looking at this objectively, and you say, okay, this guy, good intangibles, good production last season, undersized. Do we want, do we want to put our money there, right? That's a critical component of an NFL team in offense now. The playmaker, the dual threat, the gadget type receiver who can line up in different spots, who can give you options both, short and down the field, and who maybe can even contribute in the return game, gives you some, multiple looks on offense. Sure. But what does the investment in that player look like in Harbaugh's world, in Donna Ponte's world of valuing players? That's what we don't know. The Giants as an organization love Wandale, no doubt about it. I mean, there's no question there. I'm just interested to see what they decide he's worth. Does someone else decide he's worth more? It could be a case where the Giants reward him and other teams like what he brings, but don't value him the way the Giants do. And then it also falls on the player. Like Wandale Robinson could be a guy who knows that he just had maybe as good of a season as you can have based on his usage and production with that usage. And if this is the time to capitalize now, if another team is offering more than the Giants are, is that signed, sealed, and delivered? I think it would be in that sense. I wouldn't blame him for that at all. But like I said, the Giants they have a dearth of players who are draft picks, draft picks and homegrown players, right? And as an organization with Slayton, they recognized that they were not known as a team that was rewarding their own, with the Saquon situation. So they pay Darius Slayton, they retain Darius Slayton, they pay for not only his production, but who he is as a person and as a glue guy and leadership and in the building and that type of thing. And so Wandale does fall into that category potentially. The tricky part is you're building this receiver room. You already have money invested in Slayton this year. Are you then paying Wandale and then also using a high pick on a wide receiver plus Malik, who's coming down the pike, who once he gets healthy is going to be looking, to get paid not that far into the future either, right? So you have to fit all of that in when considering what the Giants need on their roster, especially in need of players on the interior defensive line, players on the offensive line, players in the secondary, tight ends, linebackers, so much that the Giants need to hit, and they need to make decisions on where they're allocating those resources. Candy clarifies he meant restructuring contracts to free up money. No announcements on that yet, Candyman. This week could solidify some of that, though, for sure. Got a sneeze coming up here. Sorry about that. Novice of Things checks in with a $5 super chat, says, care to give us a breakdown of what you are planning on doing day to day this week? How are you, quote, working the room, so to say? Well, it's a combination, Novice, of scheduling lunches and dinners and some breakfasts even, or coffees. It's also, let's say, because think about it, I have work to do every day, whether it's writing, whether it's doing interviews over the phone or on Zoom, whatever it is. But I also plan to, and have already, but you go to hotels or areas where team personnel are meeting, where agents are mingling, and where even free agent players sometimes are walking through looking for media and having conversations. And you put yourself in position where you can meet new people. You're working this to connect and stay connected with, and to reaffirm relationships and strengthen relationships with people with, obviously it spans far past the Giants to around the league, to working for different agencies and working for the NFL in general. And you find a way to have those conversations and strengthen relationships or create new ones. So, for example, when I'm writing a story tomorrow, I may park myself in a hotel lobby where I know several teams are staying, text a few people that I know that are there to come through and stop by. They'll tell me, hey, I'm over at the Westin, and I'll go over and meet them there for 30 minutes and a coffee. Or they'll come by where I am because they have a meeting 20 minutes later, and they'll stop by and say hi to me. And then when they stop by, we have a couple conversations, and I invite them to dinner the following day, and out we go, So it's a combination of scheduling your work and your meetings and your connections. And then the other part of it is pivoting and maneuvering the week to fit how things are evolving, right? And depending on what the story is, like just as an example, last year, when the Matthew Stafford stuff kicks off, I changed my plans for that day to pursue certain sources, finding out where they are, what their schedule's looking like, how do I run into them, or Some of them were people that I knew who you start texting. Maybe they have something for you over text. Maybe they say, hey, meet me later. We'll talk about it. I don't have these details yet, but let's grab a drink at the bar later, and I'll tell you everything I know. Right. So like that's what happened last year with Stafford. If you remember, I was able to get to, some information during the negotiations and conversations about the Giants and Stafford definitely talking. What was it looking like? What were the swinging doors of whether he would say yes or no? And so that was a day where, hey, I had one plan for the day, and then it changed. And then you might end up texting somebody who you were planning on meeting with at lunch, saying, hey, sorry, I got to bag this today. I'm really sorry. Let's get together tomorrow. I have to go meet somebody else because something came up. Right. And so other people are doing those things to you too, as things come up. And I will say this, one thing that's ticking everybody off is the weather. It's like you might have a dinner scheduled with somebody on Tuesday. Now that person can't fly out from their city because of snow or whatever it is, or they can't get here, or the people that they were planning to meet can't get here. So now they're not staying as long. So maybe they can't do dinner. They have to move it up. So it's a very fun environment. I would say that my plans to work the room, one of the things I enjoy most is moving around, talking to people, sharing, trying to help people, helping me back. And so, let's say if you guys have ever gone to a party where you didn't know anybody, I function well in those environments. So sometimes you go somewhere to meet someone, and then that's the conversation you have, and that's why you're there, and that's it. And that happens at the combine, and I do that. And then there's other times where you say, you know what? I have a half an hour right now. I'm going to go over here, see if anybody's around. And then you're texting a couple people that you know to meet you there if they have time. But then you run into so-and-so. And next thing you know, they're like, hey, actually, we're going to grab lunch. You want to come? And now next thing you know, you're sitting there and you're picking their brain, and they're giving you a lead to the next story, to the next conversation, to the next piece of news. And so it's a very interesting week. But as a reporter, as you can tell from how I'm describing it, you got to keep it you have to keep it partially locked down and planned, and partially open to pivoting and to being able to react and think and work on your feet. But to give you asked about like planning and day-to-day and schedule, largely the only schedule part of this that is critical as far as the Giants go is that Joe Schoen is scheduled to talk at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. And John Harbaugh is scheduled to talk at, let me see, it is 1 p.m. Tuesday. So Schoen 10 a.m., Harbaugh 1 p.m. on Tuesday. And so that's the critical time to be there, especially in a year like this with a new coach and a new direction and a new identity for the organization and new structure and everything. So that was the critical moment to be here. Sometimes organizations, Giants included, give you some time off podium, off camera with these guys as well. So opportunities to talk face-to-face with John Harbaugh or Joe Schoen, and to, whether it's a group interview or whether it's getting together with them individually. Sometimes you have those opportunities. And, like I said, all 32 teams do things differently and do different versions of that. It might be a dinner. It might be a meet and greet in a conference room that's off the record, right? So those things happen too. And then you certainly take a look at the player podiums of every player and prospect who competes at the combine has a schedule of when they meet with teams, when they do media interviews, and when they're competing and doing the events. And so you're always keeping an eye on that, to what you're looking at, to work around, and to hone in on. If you're somebody who's covering every single day, every single minute of those interviews, you can certainly stay on that schedule and then bounce to the different podiums to have conversations and to kind of get a full picture of what these guys look like physically in person right next to you, and to hear their hear their backgrounds and to tell their stories. And so, a person in my position working as a one-man band, essentially, you do a bunch of that, but a player who's talking this Wednesday, if I don't get it to it this Wednesday, I can certainly zero in on a prospect from the information gathered this week, let's say next week or the following week. And so you're gathering that as well. But yes, the primary scheduling piece that you should all know is that Schoen talks 10 a.m. Tuesday, and Harbaugh talks 1 p.m. Tuesday. All right, let's check into the regular chat. Antonio, what's going on? He says, "What's up, Pat? It's been a minute, bro. I know. If you had to guess, out of all of our own free agents, who do you think will be back?" That's a great question. It's a great question. I think, like I said, I think that, well, Flott's an interesting one to me because he plays a premium position where the Giants' other investments recently, including Paulson Adebo and Deonte Banks specifically, have not yielded the return or results that are required for those investments. And if you're the Giants right now, team building wise, those are premium positions, the outside corner positions, where you can't afford this season to not take a hard look on investing significantly in that area of your roster, right? Now, Adebo, you've already invested in for this year. So the Giants may, now again, this is dangerous, but they may be saying, listen, like we got to just trust our initial evaluation and the free agent signing that we made last year with Paulson and count on him to be one of those starting corners, being a veteran, being a guy that we gave significant money. And so we're going to really prioritize another outside corner, whether it's in the draft or elsewhere in free agency at a different number, but we're not going to break the bank for a guy like Cordell Flott. And then we're going to hope that Drew Phillips is better in the slot as well. But to me, that's how they normally do think. And I don't think they can afford to think that way. I did not get a sense coming out of the season. My sense was that I felt like Cordell Flott was going to sign elsewhere, and was going to get more money elsewhere and was going to be eager for a new opportunity and that valuation elsewhere. But, I'd be curious if the Giants' priorities change, and if they recognize that they can't shift from that. And that maybe that informs their ability to, spend more on a player at a position like that. So kind of interested to see. I don't have a definitive answer on that on Flott. Now, you asked which player is most likely to re-sign of the Giants' current free agents. It's a good question. I mean, I look at the Giants free agent list. If I were the Giants, I would still want Dane Belton on the team in his same role, but I would imagine that Belton is going to find an opportunity elsewhere. But if I were the Giants, that is a well-rounded person and a useful player at some key positions. Now, you don't want him. He's not your starting safety every down, every game, but he can chip in, and he is extremely strong special teams player. So, is Belton going to come back? I'm not going to say that, but I would like to see them prioritize a player like that. Frankly, it's a little bit early for me to guarantee to you that somebody is going to resign. Joe Farry says, if it feels like ownership wants to extend Joe Schoen, why not do it during the euphoria of the Harbaugh hiring where it could blow over with no pushback? Why wait? Joe Schoen is now Milton from Office Space. Yeah, Joe, I think you bring up a good point there. you know, I think the reality is that the way that I have characterized the Giants evaluation or evolution as an organization and their Harbaugh's preferred reporting structure and laying it out for you guys who has what jobs and who's in charge of what and how Shane's power has been reduced. All of that has happened, right? And so, I think that you make a fair point. What I wrote in the Daily News recently, and I'll tell you this, Joe, too, is there's conflicting information right now. Not like one is right, one is wrong. There are people on both sides of this Joe Schoen debate right now saying opposite things. So in other words, there is some chatter that Schoen believes he's going to receive a contract extension after the draft. And obviously there have been reports that he is going to. There are other people I trust who say that nothing has happened yet on that front and who doubt that that is going to happen when that time comes. So it would be disingenuous of me to tell you one or the other is definitely happening because people are saying both versions of that. So that's as honest as I can be right now. Bronx Boy says, I'm done with the coaching front office carousel. I want to know what John Harbaugh thinks the biggest player need is. Yeah, great point, Bronx Boy. And, I do think that the identity, the physicality, I would be shocked if once we talk to Harbaugh and he does this press conference, my expectation is we're going to hear a lot about physical identity, about the lines of scrimmage. I don't know if he's going to say, yeah, we need defensive tackles and offensive linemen, but I do expect the Giants to attack those areas. I do expect the Giants with John Harbaugh here. The one thing the Giants have done in recent years under Joe Schoen as this new regime with him and Daboll, when they were trying to change the team, fix the roster, all those things, they're much more of like a group that picks players rather than builds a team, if that makes sense. Sometimes when you're doing scouting, you get so in the weeds of the individual player evaluations, you forget to fit it into an overall construct of what the team on the field is actually going to look like. And I think that Harbaugh is getting his hands around that. One thing that everyone in Baltimore constantly talks about is how he had this guiding mantra of be a Raven, and how over time the Ravens had really created, like when you say that, right? When you say be a Raven, okay, you can close your eyes and you can think of the type of player and team that is describing, right? And right now, be a Giant means a lot of different things. Now, we know what be a Giant has meant over the course of the organization's proud history, but we don't know what it means for what the current team is. We saw some flashes of that from guys like Brian Burns, frankly, John Michael Schmitz, and kind of his approach to everything last year, and the offensive line taking it into their hands. I thought they did a strong job of asserting themselves as well. That was a little quieter, but that's just what happens with offensive lines. And obviously you had the Dart Scatterboo dynamic. But I do think that the answer to the player needs that he identifies, Bronx Boy, will be rooted in being a difficult team to play against. Offensive line, defensive line, tight end, right? Like strengthening up the middle of the field, safeties, having that kind of punishing, in your face style and priority to how they play and to the type of people they're adding. I know that isn't as direct of an answer as you have said, or as you're kind of asking for. But that's the sense I get. Joe thinks the whole who reports to who thing is getting stupid. No, Joe, it is not. This is a very real reality about how different the Giants organization is going to look and operate. And just think of it. it's different if Joe Schoen is talking a contract with prospective contracts versus Dawn Aponte is talking prospective contracts. And if Aponte, who reports to Harbaugh, is really Harbaugh's lieutenant in the room for that, right? Is Harbaugh's influence seeping so deeply into that, and is Shane so marginalized that really is going to indicate a dramatic, immediate shift in the types of players they add and sign and prioritize, and in how they build the team right away? That's why it's relevant. It's relevant to the type of the team that they put on the field. Milton Plaza says, a lot of people that I trust and talk to say you are negative. Why you always trying to start controversy? Stay positive. Oh, no, Milton Plaza, definitely not negative. I do think that I have an ability to get to news and information that is different from what maybe everybody else is focusing on at the time, but that is true and relevant. And I think that the Giants have won 7 total games the last 2 years. To be positive about that would be lying to fans and lying to people, and or maybe not understanding what you're watching. Now, Harbaugh's hiring and the last month and a half or so of ramping up to this new look Giants is certainly encouraging. It feels like it could be a new day for the Giants, and that is absolutely a positive, right? Especially from the standpoint, Milton, of the Giants' internal recognition of, hey, we really have to start doing some of these key things in our building differently, whether it's the training room, the strength room, whether it's the how they're picking players, how they're identifying talent, how they're managing their salary cap, right? So it's a good thing that the Giants are creating this change, and that is a positive. I think more what you're referring to, Milton, and maybe what people are talking to you about. Listen, sometimes I report things that people don't want out there, but that are very true and that are very that shed light. I'm not the only one, but I'm just saying they shed light on the reality behind the scenes. I think, Milton, mostly the average person, and this would go for anything, like I'm on the outside of medical discussions in the medical field. I don't know the first thing about it, right? But there would be things that, let's say, a doctor might tell me something that they consider obvious, and it might be brand new news to me. And I'd say, how could that be true? That can't be true. I've never even understood that. How could that be reality in the medical field? That would be so different. And that's not what I've heard. And that's what other people don't tell me. And the doctor could say, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter, but that's just the reality. This is obviously much less serious than that. But in my field, what I find, Milton, is that there is a real human element to how all these organizations work and operate. And there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that is true and real, whether it's the relationships between people, whether it's dynamic of the working environment, whether it's who's accountable for what mistakes, whatever it is, that's all happening. And it's much uglier, crazier than you would expect. The term stranger than fiction. It's like the idea that something can happen that you'd say, wow, okay, this is real. It just happened. But if I were writing a story or if I were writing fiction right now and I were making up a story in my imagination, this is so crazy. I wouldn't have even thought it myself, And certainly a lot of that has happened with the Giants and with NFL franchises. Let me give you an example, Milton. I was told by some other reporters, as well as some people in the league and fans, last offseason, last summer, I'm talking about how Shane and Dable are on the hot seat. I'm talking about how, the NFL could have a lot more coaching openings again this current cycle. And I had, there were national insiders telling me it was negative to focus on the fact that a lot of these teams might turn over their coaching staffs. Like, there are national insiders who you probably think never get anything wrong, who were sitting there telling me that, there's going to be 4 coaching openings this cycle. And it turns out there were what, 10, 11, 12, right? So when I first say it, it's, oh, you want people to lose your jobs, you're negative. And then when it happens, everyone just pretends they always knew the whole time, So Milton, I definitely think that the way I report on things sometimes makes people uncomfortable, but I don't think there's anything wrong with people being uncomfortable if it comes down to people being accountable. And certainly I take pride in swimming against the grain and in not just parroting anything somebody else is saying, but at just doing my own work. And you can be a decision, or you can make your own decision, obviously, about how you want to take it and filter it and all that. But, thank you for weighing in, for saying that, and for being here. Novice says, heard Joe Schoen is a bit thin-skinned and takes challenges personal rather than wanting to debate his position. Novice of things has been doing his research. Francis says, I disagree. The organizational structure and management decision making is the foundation of any sports team. It's fundamental to the future of the Giants. Agree. You're buried in snow, Bronx boy. Sorry to hear that. One of the worst teams in the league for several years. Pat should be negative. You should be asking yourself why and not letting the media and team blow smoke up your butt. Yeah, Joe, I was trying to be diplomatic there, but I like that. Mr. Murphy says, Pat, glad you got there safe. Who are some linebackers the Giants should be targeting via free agency in the draft? We haven't had a good linebacker since Antonio Pierce. Honestly. Well, that's one thing that stood out to me at the Super Bowl was, I wasn't the only person who noticed this. I'm sure you could see it on your television. But Ernest Jones, the linebacker for the Seahawks, was flying around the field. Absolutely flying around the field. And it was, I think sometimes you fall prisoner to being so consumed by your own team that you're not opening your eyes enough to kind of the full gamut of that position. So what I mean by that is, like, Illuminor is a good example. Better than what the Giants have had at right tackle, but still not great. And if you're a Giants fan, you can fall into, how could we lose Illuminor? He was so good for us. But if you then go and watch Lane Johnson every week for the Eagles, you would say, oh, yeah, like that's what a dominant right tackle looks like. We have to keep striving for more there, right? Just as an example. So Ernest Jones with the Seahawks, a good example of that. Watching him in the Super Bowl close the gap on like a Drake May scramble to the sideline and running like, I don't know, like a fast running back, and he's playing linebacker. And you can, in that moment, if you're somebody who's used to watching the Giants, or, all respect to Bobby Wagner, but like, let's say the Commanders this year, things like that, defenses like that, or the Cowboys when Overshawn is not playing at linebacker, you look at these units and then you watch Ernest Jones and you're like, oh, that's what we need to strive to. I will say Okereke did get faster as it seemed like he was getting healthier down the stretch of last season, but there's a lot to look at there. And certainly an area of the roster that the Giants need to attack. I know a guy from Texas, Anthony Hill Jr. He's a guy who has jumped out on some lists as somebody who could make sense for the Giants, helping them with their run defense, one of the worst run defenses in football last year. And this guy was a 2-time All-American at Texas and has first-round talent, but could end up being like a day 2 pick. And that's just one name to keep an eye on. I mean, nobody sat here and told me like, hey, the Giants are taking Anthony Hill Jr., but just from a standpoint of having talent, maybe some value on the board due to some injuries in the past, an ability to help lock down a defense that in the run game was just unacceptable. That's just an example of where they could look. Free agent market, I mean, ideally, you don't want to overspend at a position like this unless it's an absolute home run. A lot of the available middle linebackers right now are older. Let's see who's out there. We got some of the free agent linebackers. Wagner, obviously 36 years old. Demario Davis, 37 years old of the Saints. Devin White, Alex Singleton, Levante David, Alex Anzalone, Quay Walker from the Packers, interesting player. I think for the Giants, like I saw people, you can't react to everything. Like, for example, I saw somebody say the other day, I think the Cowboys were releasing Logan Wilson, and people said, people looking at him, oh, is it a linebacker? It's available. It's like, no, you're not trying to scrape players off the heap. Like, you're trying to add talent that is really going to be able to sustain. And so that's why I think that's a position where the Giants should be reinforcing through the draft. But you balance that too, right? You're probably going to balance your investment at safety with your investment at linebacker. And what I mean by that is not just financial, but also experience wise, right? Do you want youth running both the safety and the middle linebackers position down the field? Or do you need some experience in one of those areas just to settle things down? When it comes to, Denard Wilson's, excuse me, first season as defensive coordinator and John Harbaugh's first season as head coach, right? So obviously on the edge, Jihad Ward, a player that I'm looking at if the Giants want to bring some additional accountability into their building, and some free agents from the Titans where Denard Wilson just coached, who played significant snaps, James Lynch, interior, Arden Key on the edge, Sebastian Joseph Day on the interior are some players who have natural ties to Wilson there. Novice says, can you ask around about Patrick Queen, released by Pittsburgh, Christian Wilkins, potential Kayvon Thibodeaux trade for a player, right? Yes, no, Thibodeaux definitely is a conversation to be had here, no doubt about it. He jumps off the page as a player who, based on the Giants' investments at the edge positions and his value potentially bringing return, do you look at that? Is that a trade that you're making, right? Something to watch, no doubt. I think the interesting thing about Kayvon is, and yes, that could happen, certainly. The interesting thing about him is the Giants, when Thibodeaux was playing last year, like Abdul Carter was still learning to be an NFL player. And to me, even when Carter got going, it was much more as someone being used in multiple ways and in a versatile, variable kind of environment, standing him up, rushing on the interior, rushing, getting a running start on those pass rushes, sometimes on the edge, moving from edge to edge, but not always in the same spot, creating mismatches, lining him up and having him rush against a guard rather than a tackle, things like that. And, I think I'm curious if you get rid of Thibodeaux and you trade him. Of course, yes, you have a lot invested in Abdul and you have a lot invested already in Burns. But then how do you reinforce that position? How do you who are the players that I think you need to attack on the edge to set a strong edge to be strong run defenders? Because Carter is a big time splash player, right? Like that's I think when you drafted him third overall, you were looking more at his high end ability, game breaking ability, right? Sacks, forced fumbles, forcing turnovers, changing a game with one pass rush, like that ability. But is the more well-rounded nature of a guy like Thibodeaux something Like, how are the Giants replacing that? I do think if the Giants trade Kayvon, that they need to have a defined plan of how they're replacing that on the line of scrimmage and on the edge. Because Kayvon last year came in guns blazing, like best shape of his life, seriously. Like just somebody who covers him all the time. In great shape, was ready to go, was setting a really good tone in camp and going into the season. Like he wasn't the problem, So that's one thing I'm interested about there. Novice says, to be clear, I don't want to trade Kayvon, but would consider for a starter at another need position. No, it's definitely, you look at the roster and then the plans of, how are we going to be expending our resources and where can we use this elsewhere to help patch our team together? It's certainly a conversation that has to be had this week. Great question, and thanks for the super chats. Dan thinks Wandale will be going to the Titans. Well, like I said, my opinion is if Wandale Robinson's getting a ton of money from a team like that to go follow Brian Daboll, let's say, then more power to him. I think I'm happy for him, and I think he had a great season, but I don't think he's an irreplaceable player. And there's not many irreplaceable players, but I don't see him that way. That would be interesting for him to follow Daboll to Tennessee because from my vantage point, running those stop routes to get blasted by middle linebackers in the middle of the field under Daboll was not his favorite thing. And I think only this year when they really started opening it up, Kafka was calling the plays again and they started sending him down the field more, did Wandale really kind of come into his own and enjoy that offense. So I guess if Daboll knows that he needs to use him that way now, that could happen based on also the contract offer and the evaluation. Bronx Boy says Slayton is one of Shane's dumbest contracts. Does it make sense for the team to go hard after Tyler Linderbaum, the center from the Baltimore Ravens? Yeah, it makes sense to me. Somebody who instills a direction in your offense, a new voice, new leader, new tip of the spear, brings John Harbaugh's way of playing and building and training and leading into one of the most important position rooms of the team. Obviously would be an interesting investment given the fact that John Michael Schmitz is here at the moment, and John Michael did play better last season. But yes, certainly I think attacking the interior of the line, recognizing that the present is not necessarily going to be the future of the line, you need to go into and have those conversations. But like I said, Schmitz being a draft pick and being somebody who just had his best season as a pro is a factor there as well, as is, like, here's one thing I look at with Linderbaum. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, right? Who knows? But is Linderbaum really, he's playing with a guy who has won an MVP in Lamar Jackson, who easily could have won a second MVP and should have won a second MVP. And is Baltimore really interested in not paying their homegrown center who has had them at the top of the league's rushing rankings virtually annually? I know that situation has gotten dragged out and it's unresolved and it's possible he could leave, no doubt. But that's one of those situations. It's like, I'll believe it when I see it, that they're not going to bring him back. But, it could happen. John says, Pat, are there any front office people in the Giants that were involved previously in player evaluation who are not at the combine? Would this be an indicator they are on shaky ground? I saw all the usual suspects when I saw all the usual suspects roll in yesterday on Sunday. Haven't seen everybody, but no noticeable changes. And the Giants have been forthright about the changes that they have made so far and announcing those once they're final. So I think so far, no meaningful changes there. Antonio says, what are your overall thoughts on the coaching staff? When do you think we will first hear from the coordinators? A good question on when we'll hear from the coordinators, Antonio. I saw one of the teams just one of the teams just did interviews with all the new coordinators. I can remember who it was. Oh, the Titans. The Titans had like a whole new staff, and they had the coordinators talk because Dable talked. I think what I heard, Antonio, about this staff is that, obviously it was piecemeal with Matt Nagy being hired, Greg Roman being hired, Denard Wilson being hired, et cetera, Chris Horton, the special teams. What I can tell you about the offensive and defensive staffs, respectively, is in the NFL, at least, the response was positive about the staff Harbaugh put together, specifically at those coordinator positions. So looking at, especially let's look at the offense. Matt Nagy obviously wasn't the first or second name that people had circled on their board of who the Giants would be hiring at offensive coordinator. But once Todd Monken took the Cleveland Browns head coaching job, that all reopened. And so the Giants land on Matt Nagy, an experienced play caller. And some skepticism over that hire, obviously, given the fact that he was a non-play calling OC that the Chiefs didn't retain. But in talking to people around the NFL, people like Nagy's fit for Jackson Dart, potentially, the type of offense that he likes to run, the encouragement on Nagy's end of maneuvering the quarterback, but moving him to throw, right? Keeping the eyes downfield, the ability to run, but maneuvering to throw. Also, no one better in the NFL than Matt Nagy at RPOs, run pass options, and that the incorporation of those elements at a high level with Dart will be extremely beneficial for this specific quarterback and this team. And that he's very good at scheming up those passing concepts for the quarterback. Now, Greg Roman's hiring, of course, an interesting hiring, Roman being brought on when his specialty is, it was interesting when he was brought on because at first you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, this guy was an offensive coordinator that got fired in Baltimore under Harbaugh and that then went to the Chargers. Now Harbaugh's hiring him, but he's not the OC. So how does this work? How does this fit? And again, went to people that I trust and asked around. And Greg Roman, he fits on this staff because of not only kind of being the conduit to what Harbaugh is looking for and expecting and having worked with him before. That's helpful because Nagy and Harbaugh haven't been on the same staff like this before, even though they're both Andy Reid, Philadelphia guys. So there's some of that translatability, but also Greg Roman being the run game coordinator and running that part of it and matching that to Nagy's skill set in the passing game with the RPOs. People think that can work. And who was it? Milton earlier asking me, why are you so negative? Here's some positive feedback for you. Positive feedback, right? And so were these the names that people were looking at as, hey, this is what I want. This is going to be the home run hire. This is what I'm eager to see the Giants do. Not necessarily, but some good returns on how people think that offensive staff could fit together. Now, Denard Wilson, this is a guy who, will give a few years and see how it goes. Obviously, encouraging returns from a standpoint of, encouraging returns from a standpoint of looking at the attitude that the Titans play with under him for the last couple of years and the fact that he has been a fast riser, that the Giants were determined to hire when Martindale resigned and Dable wanted to hire, but Wilson at the time knew that it was probably a lame duck coaching staff he would be joining, and he wasn't going to get to hire all of his assistants, and so he backed off. But this is somebody the Giants have had on their radar, and as you guys saw the story I did talking to Jihad Ward, who played for him with the Tennessee Titans, this is a coach who is going to demand a certain level of accountability, effort, and nastiness on his units and on his defense. And I think that new voice, bringing that new voice here is, and obviously, let's face it, his priority and Harbaugh's priority and his charge is going to be to make sure they stop the run. That's going to be it. Now, there isn't a track record there for being top of the league in that, but he's seen how Baltimore do it, how Baltimore did it. He has a lot of good experience, and he's a fast riser on the coaching circuit in a lot of ways. And so optimism about the staff that Harbaugh has put together. Do you think Harbaugh will have one or more of, quote, his people involved in player evaluation and not depend 100% on Schoen and old guard evaluators? Yeah, I'm interested to see that. I think certainly he'll have, there's people on this staff like Noah Riley, football analyst, some quality controls that he brought in, assistants, Matt Pease, Adam Schrack, guys like that, coming from Baltimore on the coaching staff that certainly are kind of, and the numerous football analysts that he just hired with the announcement of Sam Rosengarten coming to the strength staff. There will definitely be Harbaugh people, quote unquote, involved. But no, my understanding, I don't know all the ins and outs of each little thing, how it's being handled, but Schoen is running the scouting department. Like, that's still his purview. That's his one purview right now. But yeah, no, this is frankly, John, what I'm interested in looking into is exactly what you're asking. But a guy like Noah Riley, when he comes over, this is the position of somebody who will be in Harbaugh's headset on game days, doing game situations, things like that. But when you hire that person in that position, that person also is kind of like a data center for you. And so that's the type of person that I think could end up having influence, tentacles, voice in a lot of different areas of these conversations, not like superseding a scout and a general manager. I'm just saying, like, those analysts are people who get into those processes and put their own thumbprint on it sometimes, even if it's just one more voice involved in the folder of that evaluation. But no, I think as of right now, scouting is Schoen and the scouting staff. H5000 says Thibodeaux was drafted 5th overall in 2022, performed, if he is lucky, as a late second rounder, can't hold the edge and overpowered by decent O-linemen, trade him for a 3rd. John says you're not getting a 3rd for Thibodeaux. In my opinion, you'd be lucky to get a late 4th. He is a decent edge at this point. That's it. He's decent. Yeah. Let's see. Greg, mansplaining to me here. Let's see. Yes, Pat, let it go. It is getting very stupid. I guess you're talking about the structure. Worry about the team and what kind of players we are going to get. What can we afford? What we can't afford. And let's figure out what kind of team we're supposed to have. Yeah, Greg, I think you and I maybe just disagree on the fact that the structure and the person making those decisions impacts and dictates what that team looks like, which is 100% true, right? But I understand you want to hear more about football, the players, and the specifics of the nuts and bolts of what's coming down the pike this week. I think we're going to have more of that this week after more conversations here in Indy about what the Giants are prioritizing and what they're telling people and what people are hearing and what I'm hearing and what sources are telling me. We're going to have more details on that. But certainly the foundation that they're laying of this new structure is absolutely a factor. But thank you for your input. Let's see. Interesting. Some debate, some people saying stop being negative, and then others saying keep being negative. This team needs to get better. We need to be positive when they give us something to be positive about. So even a debate inside the fan base, for sure. Hey, Pat, long time. Yeah, Daniel, great to see you. Hope you're doing well. What do you think they do at tight end? I think they should sign a stable veteran to not only help develop Theo Johnson while he's tight end too, but also be an escape valve for Dart. Isaiah Likely, obviously a player who jumps out, right? As somebody who could be excuse me. Isaiah Likely, definitely somebody who could easily be a priority there. Mid-20s, played 50% of the snaps. Harbaugh prioritizes and has prioritized, and the organization that he was in prioritized the tight end position. And yeah, of course, it's not always as simple as, oh, yeah, what team did he used to coach? Who are their free agents? But Likely's a very good player, gets in the end zone, good hands, right? And honestly, Daniel, even though I think your head's in the right place of like, how could this also benefit our existing players like a Theo Johnson? I think Theo Johnson is who he is, but also like you're not signing Isaiah Likely to help develop Theo. You're signing Isaiah Likely to play over him and to be the guy, right? And so, although those can be offshoot benefits, like let's say a Jameis Winston in your quarterback room type thing, although that can be a benefit, I think ideally you're just signing a guy who's going to produce and play at a high level, and that's where you go. You do look for guys who are going to be good teammates, who are going to give more intangibly as well as tangibly. But Likely is a tight end that jumps out to me. Good, interesting tight ends. I think Kyle Pitts, they just announced, was the Falcons are going to franchise tag George Pickens and the Cowboys as well. Candyman says, sometimes honesty is mistaken for negativity. For me, I want the truth, no BS. In my opinion, that's what we get here. Thanks, Candy. Benji says, Pat is the man. Appreciate you, Benji. Fans should not confuse negativity with critical analysis, says Francis. Thank you, guys. Nicely said, says Benji. Agree. Giants likely hold him and maybe deal near deadline for a third team needing a pass rusher in Thibodeaux. Agree. That could be a potential reality or outcome. How about Styles at 5? Former safety, now a linebacker, seems like a John Harbaugh type of player. Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, because Sonny Styles from Ohio State, a player who projects very high, projects top 10 potentially, and the Giants so far have been mock drafted as receiver / offensive line / even safety at 5. But could they go linebacker? I think it's certainly a position. Now, this is, again, those of you who don't want to hear about the reporting structure, this goes back to team building philosophy here. Safety and linebacker, not positional value, smart picks there, right? But John Harbaugh could determine that that's exactly what this team needs, identity-wise, personnel-wise, et cetera. And if he and Dawn Aponte have enough say-so, and if they make a selection like that, that would most likely reflect a shift in the way that this team is operating, right? It would. Like Joe Schoen, based on how he treated safety position and positional value in the past, is not a draft a Kyle Hamilton in the top 10 or 15 guy, right? Baltimore was. So those are the questions about, who exactly is looking at this. That's an interesting thought, Mr. Murphy. Nothing wrong with a guy with position flexibility who also fills a huge need on your roster. CT says, when do you think the Giants will start cutting players? Well, a lot of times what happens, CT, is that this week people find out, let's say they get an inkling. Let's just hypothetically say I'm Evan Neal's agent or Jalen Hyatt's agent, whatever it is. Let's say those players hear that they most likely are going to be released this week, or they get a sense that they should be taking a look at their market. They kind of get a head start to, okay, maybe they're not going to be released ASAP, but they get a little bit of a runway to work that. And then those moves start coming down in early to mid-March. as the teams are really starting to clear the deck and make those investments. That's kind of how that usually goes. But imminently, as far as the NFL calendar goes, because we're only a few weeks away from the start of free agency, CT. John says, yeah, I think it's more likely Kayvon gets swapped for a player versus a draft choice. And Michael says, well, if he stays and plays well early, then that's even better. A2 says, after 40 plus years as a Giants fan, I'm done. Can't support a perverted owner. Family values, baby. And A2, I'm glad you said that, because this is what I said back when they enabled the Josh Brown situation, which is different, but, regrettable and was poorly handled by the Giants and by ownership on down. The Giants think of themselves, like Dave Gettleman famously said, we're the New York Giants. We handle everything with class, right? And you can walk around with your chest out like you're different and like you have higher standards or the highest standards. But when you support or enable or stand by and say nothing, when something like the Steve Tisch Epstein files connection and evidence comes out, you are enabling it, you are allowing it to happen, and you are part of that person's organization. It is unacceptable to enable that, to support that, and to sit by idly and do nothing with the evidence we already have in front of us, with potentially more evidence coming down the pike. We don't know. That goes for the NFL, that goes for the Giants, and it's shameless. Emrod says, a simple restructure of Dexter, Burns, and Andrew Thomas contracts can save $61 million. Do you see that coming soon? Or try to find trades for those big contracts? Those are all players that are so high level that if you get rid of them, you're immediately trying to replace them. Thomas's injury history, obviously a concern, but again, the Giants are not full of high-end A-list players, right? Dexter is an interesting player. I think that that's one player I'm interested in getting to the bottom of this week. Dexter's a player who was not, even though they paid him, he outplayed that contract the following year. Then last year, he's just really struggled with all the losing, and he wasn't able to shoulder the burden of being the leader of a team that was in such disarray. And this is kind of an inflection point for him as a Giant. I'm interested to see if the Giants want to restructure a contract like that or where those conversations go. But I will say this about Dexter, like the best version of the Giants has Dexter on their team dominating. I mean, if you talk about players who the Giants have let go, that it's hard to see them succeed elsewhere. I mean, can you imagine if they didn't have Dexter and what he would do? But listen, some of his best friends, Leonard Williams and Julian Love, just went somewhere else and won a Super Bowl. I can promise you Dexter saw that. No Mets says, what's up? No Mets, great to see you as always. Thanks for being here. Novice says, it seems like outside of John Harbaugh taking a bunch of interviews, it's gotten quiet from the Giants. What do you make of that? Yeah, I definitely think that Joe Schoen's version of the Giants is a very leaky version. And certainly, I mean, Harbaugh has his people that he's willing to tell everything. I mean, obviously, as you can see. And credit to, Ian O'Connor especially is so plugged in. I mean, plugged in is not even the word, right? He's literally writing stories direct from John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh is telling him everything, showing us where it's headed, where it's going, and credit Ian, man. He's a force. But I think from the standpoint of the Giants going quiet, I think they've been a leaky sieve. And I think that even though Harbaugh clearly plays the game that everybody plays, I believe that there is certainly an understanding coming into this new regime, coming on board and assimilating into the organization, with Harbaugh doing an autopsy of what has gone wrong and what it, where it's headed, where it is, where it could be. I think certainly controlling the message and narrative is up there. Let's see. If we don't go defense at 5 and they are serious about giving Dart another weapon, I'm all over Jeremiah Love, the running back from Notre Dame at 5. Kid is an unreal talent. Drafting a running back at 5, that would be interesting. I mean, you know me, go Irish. I'll take a running back. The Giants do need help at running back, but drafting one at 5 would be pretty gutsy given where their team is. DeIlla says Belichick would have moved off Dexter by now. Yeah, it's definitely something wrong with Dexter's enjoyment of playing football right now for this team. But certainly just winning games could change that, right? So John Harbaugh needs to figure that out. I think he needs to be a priority for them, though, figuring out how to get their hands around that, get that player back on track, all of that. Love can catch like a wide receiver, too. Yeah, see, no Mets likes that idea. Yeah, see, to me, listen, the Giants do need more running back help. There's no doubt about it. I think that they have a lot of other glaring needs where you can get running backs elsewhere. Not that running backs aren't important. Obviously, we found with Saquon Barkley that it was important. But, man, that would be super interesting. Joe Schoen drafting a running back at 5 or even trading back to 7 and then drafting a running back after that Saquon decision, for sure. This is a great table setter for what this week is going to be, guys. I believe that I will be able to deliver more live chats, live information, and breakdowns for you on here this week. So I'm here till Thursday. My hope is that we'll be able to do at least one more live chat during this week to catch up on everything. We might be able to do one daily because tomorrow we have Harbaugh and Shane at the podium. There'll be plenty to discuss from that, as well as to read in the New York Daily News, where I'm writing all of my stories and producing information there. And to follow me on all of my platforms on social media, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Threads, X, P Leonard NYDN there. It's PL NFL. Everywhere else. And excuse me. Let's see. What else we got? What do you think it's going to take to get Wyatt Teller, the guard from the Browns? He and Linderbaum should be priority in free agency. Thoughts? Well, I definitely think that the Giants need to live at the top of the offensive line markets. And when I say markets, I mean NFL draft market and boards as well as free agency boards. What will it take to get him? Guy played 70% of his snaps last year at 32. The guard market at the moment, let's check it out. I have to admit to you right now, I don't have a valuation coming to me at the moment of somebody saying this is what Wyatt Teller is going to need. I mean, the top of the right and left guard markets are touching, $23, $24 million a year, with top 10 salaries over $15 million a year. So that's where the guard market has been. And obviously with the salary cap going up and franchise tag values, prices are always going up. So that's where the guard market has been. Winning games does fix things to an extent, but the main goal is to win a Lombardi trophy. Everything else is just window dressing, in my opinion, says DeIlla. I don't believe this team can do it with limited time Dexter has. I think that's a fair point, DeIlla. Just a question of how fully are you tearing this up and rebuilding it? Like, certainly, as much as Dexter did not produce anything close last year to what you expect from him, at his best level, he gives the Giants a dynamic game changer. And let's say if he played this coming year, like he played a few years ago, like let's say in 2022, obviously that's several years ago now. But if he played that way and if he put that on tape on the field while Burns was also doing what he did last year and Abdul took another step, now you're talking like everyone last year said the Giants looked like they could have the best defensive line in the league. They obviously did not. But like that's how it could actually look like that, you know? Without him, does it look like that? They also really don't have much depth there. But I agree with you. That's a name I'm very interested to see how much the Giants are looking at. Are they looking at a market at all? Are they looking at are they considering that at all? Or is he an untouchable immediately? And how are they dealing with that if he's an untouchable, the financial element of it? Pat, what's the organization chart below Dawn Aponte, says No Mets. No Mets, we talked about this at the beginning. You can check back and watch the beginning of our chat because I definitely go into that in deep detail. But what I've been told and what I reported is that essentially Shane runs the scouting department and he's scouting, but that's it. And then Dawn is reporting to John and the rest of the building reports to Dawn. That's what I've been told. And thank you for the super chat. Hey, Pat, so the Giants did not use football analytics before Harbaugh was hired? No, they've used football analytics. So people like Ty Siam, Cade Knox, who just left with Dable and that staff going to Tennessee. They've had people working in those spots. Amos Jones for Joe Judge back when he was here on that staff. So the Giants have had that, but they've been behind the curve compared especially to Baltimore, who are one of the trailblazers. And actually Daniel Stern, who just went to the Seattle Seahawks, him going to the Seahawks instead of following Harbaugh to New York is a big deal. He was running that show for the Baltimore Ravens, was a big part of Harbaugh's operation there and well known to be among the best, if not the best in that field as far as not only in his position, but also where he's headed and growing. And so, not a great thing that he didn't come here, but Harbaugh did bring Noah Riley with him, who was on the football analytics and analyst side of Baltimore with him to New York. And Harbaugh understands how critically important that part of the process is. So it's more like, hey, the Giants have known that this was an important part and they will continue to try to build towards what Harbaugh had built in Baltimore and then assimilating that knowledge, turning this process into something they can be even prouder of. Because their game management side of things has not been good enough, even though they've been involved in that side. No Met says, so why does Harbaugh trust Shane with scouting? Mostly a rhetorical question. Yeah, we already covered the Mr. Negative comments, but we covered that earlier. You could go and hear my thoughts on that earlier, but thanks for being here, NB. No Mets, I think what it is there are some organizations in the NFL that run with a more head coach centric structure, and they let the GM play in the sandbox of scouting because he's the expert over there, but that person isn't the final say or call on things throughout the building. And for some teams that works, and for the Giants, I think the way I view it is when these transitions occur and you're inheriting a front office like Harbaugh is, you're not tearing everything up and bringing in a whole new front office and starting fresh and new a couple months before the draft, even less time prior to free agency, and to start building your team. It is pretty common to not rip everything up right away and to try to capitalize on the process and information and systems that you have in place in the short term while evaluating those for the long term. And so I don't know if we'll find out how much 100% trust there is there. Is this Shane interviewing for his job? If it is, will he keep it? Will he not? My vantage point is nothing that's happening now guarantees that anything is going to happen later. But I do think as of right now, this is the Giants' current operation. But certainly Aponte's hiring and her aspirations throughout her career, her experience, and her wide sweeping influence in the building is noteworthy, along with the way that Harbaugh has structured the rest of this staff. Everyone has to remember Dex had elbow surgery late November 24, came back earlier than he should have. Should have seen him back to his. We should see him back to his normal form this season, hopefully. DeIlla says, to me, I don't think this team needs to have a Dexter Lawrence. Give me a couple of cost-effective options that can control the line of scrimmage in the running game. That's it. I don't believe the team needs to pay an arm and a leg for that kind of production out of the interior. Novice says he was participating in tug of war in the Pro Bowl last year with that injury healed already. Is an excuse that can be used. And here's what I would say, DeIlla. This is the interesting part of it. It's a good debate from you guys, too. Thanks, Emrod, as well. An interesting debate here, though, is that so I believe when we had the conference championships, the AFC and the NFC conference championships, when they were set, the final four teams, so it was the Seahawks and the Rams and the Patriots and the Broncos, right? Those four teams were the top four teams in the entire NFL through the regular season at creating interior quarterback pressure. So the top four teams, the teams that created the most quarterback pressure from the interior defensive line, were the final four standing in the playoffs. Seahawks, Rams, Broncos, Patriots. Now, it's not that way every year, but one or two, usually I went back and looked, of the top four are in that category and are usually in the top in those conference championship games. Or let's say it's a team like the Kansas City Chiefs where, like, even if they didn't rank one or two, Chris Jones might have been like the guy that season creating the most interior pressure of anybody, even if as a tandem their whole interior didn't, But certainly I think that's the thing that's always in the back of your mind. It's like we as a team, no matter who you are, look at the way that the Eagles built their interior defensive line, stacking Jalen Carter on top of Jordan Davis, things like that. You do need elite play there now in the modern NFL. You do need it. So that's where the decision gets tricky. DeIlla says Dex is a slug. This fan base has an unconscionable love affair with. Defensive tackles are less athletic. NFL defense, these guys are dime a dozen. They are found in later rounds of the draft every year. I disagree with you saying they're a dime a dozen, DeIlla, but I'm 100% on board with your idea that a different version of Dexter, injury or not, mentally and persistence-wise and effectiveness would need to be there to justify the investment. I agree with that. Guys, you're the best for being here. We're pushing 2 hours here on the chat. Going to wrap it up, but first I want to tell you about not a ton of ad reads, just one thing. Tell me this gear isn't awesome. Tell me this Talking Ball with Pat Leonard gear isn't awesome. So on the chat, on the channel here on YouTube, there's a link. It's in the show notes of this. It's also, I believe, at the top of my profile on Instagram. You can get hoodies. You can get winter hats, which I know you all need right now, especially out in the Northeast. There's baseball hats. There are pint glasses for those of you who, like me, like to have a drink or two to take the edge off every once in a while. Be having one a little bit later here at the Combine. And a lot more merch and gear. And I urge you to go there to rock the gear, to support the merch and support the cause and support the channel. All of you who are here, obviously huge supporters of what we do here. And I promise I'm going to continue bringing you more and more value and listening to what you guys are looking for and bringing that directly to you, more guests, more information, more analysis, and making Talking Ball with Pat Leonard your hub for NFL and Giants news and even sports news. If you notice, we came back from Talking Ball with Pat Leonard at the Super Bowl. A lot of interesting and fun interviews with guests, not just NFL guests, also some soccer guests, right? We had Landon Donovan, the great Landon Donovan. We had Josie Altidore and doing some World Cup, some FIFA World Cup as well. So, you never know what you're going to find here on Talking Ball. Jonathan Pride says, hell yeah, let's go, Pat. Yeah, come on. This is my favorite, though. Look, so at Talking Ball with Pat Leonard, this is the Navy hoodie. And on the sleeve here, it says, from the locker room to your living room. Come on now. Love it. Oh, William with a great idea. How about a limited edition Talking Ball hoodie with Mr. Negative? That would be fire. Ooh, leaning right into the hate and to the haters. I like it. Guys, thanks for being here. Thanks for following. Thank you especially to all the super chatters. Candyman, Novice of Things, and No Mets, No Jets. Stick around. I will be, especially on X and Instagram, like when it's happening. We will have the latest from the NFL Combine, John Harbaugh, Joe Schoen at the podium. We'll have that all for you. And then we will dig into it. We will analyze. We will have new content up at the Daily News website, as well as new content up on the social channels, and maybe even another live chat tomorrow, Tuesday, to dissect everything that we've heard and seen from Shane and Harbaugh here. So this is Pat Leonard from the Daily News and the Talking Ball with Pat Leonard podcast here in Indianapolis, signing off live from Indy at the NFL Combine, but check back later for more information, news, and analysis. Thanks so much for being here. Great seeing you guys again, and stay safe. Get those shovels out and get a fire going, get some s'mores and some hot chocolate going. All right, take care.